I thought I would talk to you guys about people, strategy, and operations. So first I'll tell you about my background and what I've been up to for the last couple of years. And then I'll walk you through some of my points of view that I think are, well, just my worldview about how people work happens and what's relevant at startups. And then I'm going to tell you about one example. So I worked on the Hillary Clinton campaign, as you guys may have seen, and it was a very unique people environment, like talent operations environment. So I'm going to talk about that and kind of close with, I don't know, the most typical advice that when founders and entrepreneurs, I do a lot of coaching and mentoring in the US on startups, and the typical questions I get lead to some advice. So I'll like run through that. And then happy to answer questions. We can talk about whatever you guys want to talk about, including Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, whatever might be on your mind of interest. So, okay, my background. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the States. I went to school at University of Vermont. So I studied ecology, which will make sense in a few minutes, and complex systems. So some economics, ecology, and the study of complex systems and how they work. After college, I bounced around a lot. Like I didn't have a job. I did projects in many different organizations. And across the board, all kinds of things, like did construction, installed rain barrels, wrote grants, did business planning, like across the whole wide range of things. I actually went to grad school in Sweden, of all places, in Karlskrona, a little town in the south. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. And then after grad school, I started a recruiting company. It's called ReWork, and I built it with a couple friends. And we specifically did recruiting and consulting work around people stuff for mission-driven organizations. And our whole lens on hiring was meaningful work and like how do we get people into roles. We were observing in the States, and I think it's a trend that maybe elsewhere, like folks kind of realizing that they wanted to do work that was really aligned with their purpose and made them feel alive every day, and they didn't want to do the like 9-to-5 self and nights and weekends self as being separate. So we helped a lot of like corporate people get into nonprofits, foundations, startups, so on and so forth. And it was 4.5 years or 5 years of running that company, and then Hillary's campaign called me and said, "Hey, we want to have talent, a role for the first time on a presidential campaign. Will you do this?" And I couldn't really say no to that, so I said yes. So I did that for about a year and a half. So I was on the campaign from 10 days before we launched until 2 months after our surprise ending. And now, after traveling and kind of reflecting, I'm helping to start a new organization. Our placeholder name is Future Laboratories, but we're probably going to have a different name, that is going to be a bit of a startup incubator in the States. And our mission, which we can talk about more at the end if you guys are interested, the mission is how do we redesign American society based on everything we know now, like having looked at the last couple decades and all the technologies that are available now and all the insights we have, like how do we redesign all of our healthcare, education, the government, how everything works. So it's ambitious, and we plan to incubate not just startups, but also policy packages, art, building products directly. So it's a little bit of a hybrid studio incubator thing. We don't know. We're figuring it out. It's a lab. Okay. And then I came here. So here I am. So this is like literally in real time. Okay. So let's start with some of the worldviews. So the first thing I want to talk about is, I think in order to get down to the people level and thinking about how people work in an organization, let's start actually really high level. So the way that I've come to see, and this is based on like all the different work I've done, the way I've come to see what is happening in general is basically this, that the economy is like this very abundant there's all these opportunities. This is like, if you're into entrepreneurship and you're startups, what makes it so exciting is as long as there are humans who have any way of giving each other value, let alone exchanging money, there are going to be opportunities. There's always new pain points, new things to build, which is so exciting. Also, for those organizations and companies trying to build new things, there's all kinds of dangers, right? There's like competitors, there's mistakes you can make, there's maybe, regulations, whatever you want to call it. So at the organizational level, I see the economy very much as a jungle, which is full of surprises and difficult to navigate, but doable, like it is navigable. And if the economy is a jungle, then I think it's important to understand companies and organizations, depending on which word you want to use, as being creatures. And so there's actually a couple different working models. Like you'll find that people, especially executives investors tend to have one of two different working models for like what an organization is. They'll either think of it as a machine or they'll think of it as an organism. So I'm hugely in the camp, like completely, of thinking that organizations are organisms. They're living things. They're creatures. They don't work like a machine. You can't, no matter how much you try to program it or like run the status quo, that's not how it's going to work. Like everybody involved is going to be, all the people involved are going to be continually updating their mental models. They're going to be learning, growing, evolving, having people, the things that happen to people happen to organizations. So what goes along with this, as seeing them as being alive, basically, is it's a certain lens on looking at things like culture, right? So different companies have different personalities. You have some that are really aggressive. Well, first of all, there's all different shapes and sizes, right? There's some that are small, that grow fast. There's some that start big and kind of are these monolithic, hulking things. I mean, government is a form of organization. Like any group of humans is distributing some behavior or some personality that you can describe as an analog to what you might find in a single person. They also have preferences. So they tend to behave in predictable ways if you understand like who works there and why. So as you understand the norms and the history and the background and like what the sort of the influences that work on certain organizations, you can start to understand why they do sometimes really counterproductive things, or why they're not more, for example, there's a lot of organizations, including like big corporates, that you find people critiquing them for not being forward-looking enough or not being innovative enough or something like that. And when you understand like the way that their quarterly profit motives work on Wall Street, you can start to understand why smart people in those positions are actually doing kind of what their incentive structures indicate, which is not to be super forward-looking or something. That's like one example. Companies also have pathologies. They get sick. They run into problems that come from not being cared for in the right ways. So this might be things like workaholism or cultures that lead to things like misogyny or sexism, or there's it just goes on and on, like all these different ways in which I think everybody's been involved with cultures that like allow for people to not tell the truth and have it be okay. There's all these like shadows, right? The same way that, again, you might find people with shadows in their personalities. So the reason why all this matters is because your organization, your company is your people, then the people work that you do, which we're going to get to kind of what I include in people work, it is the most important thing. It's everything. Like the people who come and work your organization become your strategy. They give rise to your strategy. They give rise to your products and services, your tactics. It's the whole deal. So tending to them and caring for them and figuring out who should be there and why and when they should be there and what they should be doing and how they're working together. It's all like, that's the most important work. It's upstream from everything else in my view. And the people team, and we'll talk in a bit about what the people team means, but the folks whose job is to live out the people work then are like this unique, they're different than the other teams, especially large organizations. If you have, a couple hundred people or something, the people teams, this particularly relevant lever to kind of get the creature to go in the direction you want it to go and to be healthier and to grow up faster or stronger, whatever it might be, whatever you're trying to do with your organization. So I'm continually shocked at either how little attention is directly given to people work, or how much people will like say they value it, but then clearly not value it. And this is another thing I see. For some reason, a lot of investors, and speaking in the US, a lot of investors that I'm aware of will refer to people being the most important thing, but then like kind of give incentives or give directives or give advice that just runs totally counter to that in terms of like actually taking care of people. So we're going to talk about some of those details. And this is the final building block, which is the best way, I think, to understand how to take care of your employees and people who work for you. And this includes like vendors and to some extent customers and everything as well. It's just to remember, to never forget that they're human, and like humans, and I mean that like at sort of a spiritual level, but I also mean it at like a biological, physiological level. Like we have to remember that we didn't evolve or grow up, or we didn't come to be in the current like structure of society. And so things like, for example, working 100-hour weeks. I don't know what kind of situation you guys have over here in the States. There's a lot of people who like work themselves way over extended. It's a common problem, especially in startups. And we're just not designed to do that. So, there's research that shows, for example, in that case, that people's effectiveness and their productivity, not only does it decline on as a rate, like on average, it actually goes net negative. Like they get actively worse when they work. I think it's like more than 2 or 3 weeks straight at like 80 hours a week or something. And you have entire industries like finance, political campaigns, we'll talk about, where that's just the norm. People just overwork the whole time. So think about that. You're like, you have these industries where the norm is people being less productive than they would be if they kind of just, slept more and like took better care of themselves. So that's a view about people as humans. Okay. So when we talk about people work, can you all read this? I usually don't like read off the slides because it's kind of like you can read it, but these are the things, I guess we'll walk through them because I think it's important. So at the top, they are more or less in order of not like value flow, but kind of like how nested I see these things as being. At the very top, at the core, you can think of it as the top, or maybe let's go inside out. Like at the core is the DNA of the company, like why those group of humans are there. That's like the mission, the core values they share in common, routines they do together. These are the kind of things that someone's reaction to them, like whether somebody feels very aligned with doing them or not, or is aligned, is like the first baseline signal that somebody should or shouldn't be like working with this organization. And if you work outwards from those things, you're going to be in a much better position and have fewer headaches that you have to resolve when it comes to people being productive or like deciding if they should work for you or not. Talent strategy is figuring out who should we be employing at the company. Like this is related to overall strategy, right? If you're trying to go into a new market, you're having conversations about who we should hire in that market, or like what combination of experts, what combination of generalists and specialists, or versatilists, which is a new word that I'm using because I think it's relevant. Based on the talent strategy, you're like, okay, what's the talent brand? Like, what do we want to, how do we want to see to it such that people in the world, potential employees, what are they seeing, hearing, and thinking about our company, like when we're not there or when we are there, just in general? What are they seeing, hearing, and thinking? Because if you, by definition, want to hire those people, like they ought to be seeing, hearing, and thinking positive things that are signaling to them why they should work for you. And then you have all the work around recruiting. There's a book for those of you who are like really interested in effective hiring process. So one thing to say is just on its face is like most organizations are terrible at hiring. Like from an efficiency and efficacy standpoint, most hiring processes are not particularly good. People tend to think they're good at it. It's like poker. Like people think that they're good at it, but they're like statistically not very good at it. I read somewhere, I don't know if this is true, that only 10% of people have the personalities and temperaments to be good managers, and that mostly that's true. Like you can kind of work on the edges, but mostly 10% of people are kind of predestined to be able to be good managers. And I suspect that the good hiring managers might even be fewer than that, which is a challenge if you're a people team. But yeah, it's mostly because everybody thinks they're a really good judge of character, but nobody knows what that means. And because they think they're good at it, they don't get overly organized or rigorous about how they're organizing their hiring process, so they get into problems. So for those of you who are really into that track, there's a book called Who, which I recommend. The authors are Street and Smart, and they basically have this process. Basically, it's to say you want to like really separate out these 5 sub-processes and design specifically for that phase, like what you're doing. And I'm going to come back to the slide at the end, and if you all want to dig into each specific questions, we can, like, there's frameworks upon frameworks, we can go deep. But basically it's saying be really clear about who you're hiring, be really, really focused on how you're getting the word out all at once, like do a big push. Be really clear about how you're screening incoming so that you're not wasting time. Spend a lot of time with your finalists. So you're selecting amongst, you want to be like spending most of your time with 3 people that could do the job, not most of your time winnowing out 30 people who can't do the job and then like limping through and hiring 1 of 2 people at the end, because that's usually what happens. And then onboarding. It's like most organizations are not particularly thoughtful about bringing somebody up to speed very quickly, which has a huge, getting the right people or getting the best people. I always think it's, you hear all the time from hiring managers, and like when we were in the recruiting business, we hear this all the time. We want the best people. The word best people does not mean anything. Like that is the totally useless word. every context is very specific, and you need a specific kind of person. And like within that specific kind, you can have higher quality candidates. That's fine to say. But the idea in general of like the best people is just, you should like actively resist thinking that way. And if your company's talking that way, like push on them to be more specific, because that's the first way that you'll get too vague and you're thinking, if you're thinking that way. So onboarding, like even if you have the best people, even if you have the right people showing up to your company, if you don't onboard them well, like it's either going to take them longer to be effective, or they may actually not become effective, and then they're going to become like something you have to deal with and kind of phase out. Okay, talent development. So this is understanding how your people, for each person, like what they want to be doing. So career pathing, and it could be in the company, it could be helping them set up for where they want to go after the company. I'm a huge believer that it's okay and actually advisable to be clear with people up front that like they're not going to spend the rest of their lives at your company. I think retention is kind of like fighting gravity. I think organizations that focus on talent retention are kind of like thinking the wrong way about how to maximize talent these days. You want people to be deeply effective, not like there for a long time. And if they wind up being there for a long time and deeply effective, that's great. But focus on making them be deeply effective while they're there. So that's figuring out what kind of stuff they need to be learning to meet the career path that you've set out for them, or that you've set out together ideally. Learning, equipping, are there skills that they need to be taught, or, kind of piecing together like basically like development plans for each person, coaching along the way. Also included in people work, role scoping. So like making sure titling is done well. Startups get this wrong all the time. They like overinflate or like they either overinflate titles or they like under-specify titles. And people, titles aren't everything, but they really have a lot to do with people's professional identity. So you will see real shifts in like commitment and sort of dedication going above and beyond if you correctly title somebody, and also correctly give them a ramp for how to get promoted, instead of like if somebody asks to be promoted, you're like, okay, you're promoted. Like you should not do that. That's not a good thing to do. Decision-making structures. Can't tell you. This is probably the number one thing on this whole list that is not even talked about versus how important it is, which is on basically every major process at the company to have a clear explanation. That doesn't have to be complicated. Just who's the actual decider here? Who gets to like formally input? Who gets to ratify? Is it a vote? Like just what? Like literally, how's the decision being made? It doesn't mean that again it has to be complicated, but not spelling this out is a huge recipe for just like, yeah, I mean, you all know, just like endless conversations, some frustration. It becomes whoever can like last the longest in the argument, like is the one who makes the decision. It's like just not the right way. Also, when you know the decision-making structures and your teams are making bad decisions, you can immediately pinpoint like, all right, this person is not making good decisions or doesn't have the right information. We can adjust it. When it's a soup, it's like you don't know what you're working with, so it's harder. And then compensation and benefits, also important for the overall talent strategy. And then the last one, this is one that tends to like not get put explicitly in a people team. And I think one of the biggest issues, so I'll say, for example, at the new organization that I'm designing and helping build the executive team for, we're going to wind up putting the operating teams, the operations, under the people team instead of the other way around, for this reason, which is if you believe the thing about like people are the most important thing and everything is in service of taking care of the people, then you believe that all operations are in service of like people working better together, which means they should be designed with the view holistically of the talent strategy in the organization, how people are, how people want the place to work. So that means everything around how they do goal setting, how they're monitored, the KPIs they're looking at, the meeting cadence. I mean, one other thing that I see in a lot of like startups that are like 10 to 30 people is their calendars, their weeks are just an accumulation of like recurring meetings that were set like in months previously. And when you look at this week, you're like, this flow of information doesn't make any sense. Like you're like having meetings on Tuesdays that require something to be decided on like in the Thursday meeting. So you have to like wait 2 days till the Thursday meeting. It's like, you should continually be redesigning your operational cadence to make the most sense for your people and how they work. And that, in my view, is like a people function. So whether it's called that or not, the people should be on that. So here's the thing. If you're a small team or you're a founder or you're an entrepreneur or something, then you are the people team. If you work at a company that doesn't have a people team, somebody's the people team, but they're just not doing their job as well. Or like this stuff happens whether you have a plan or not. And if you don't have a plan, that means it's just happening without a design, and sometimes you can't even see parts of it happening. So making this like the first order of business for somebody who's looking strategically at people is to like make all of this stuff clear and known and presenced and surfaced to the team. And ideally to pick a person whose job is to systematically coach and cajole and like get the team to get better at all these things. So it's this weird thing where in order for people stuff to be done right, it can't be siloed. It's not some separate team. But in order for it to be done right and the whole organization coached and like led to do it right, you need a separate team, a dedicated team, I should say, whose job is to do that coaching. So this is why I think that the whole thing about like, going back to the creature analogy, it's like the people team is the one that can kind of like coax and like train the creature to like do what you want to do. And so, for really effective CEOs and founders, basically, if you have somebody who really knows about these things and how to do this well, huge leverage point for hiring. You may not be like the first person you hire, but within the first 10 to 15, if you do a minimum viable version of all the stuff yourself and are tuned to it and see things this way, and then bring somebody on, it's a really high leverage point. Are there any questions now about any of this stuff? I know I said questions at the end, but let's just do it now. Yeah.
What should, other than like contracting with you to do it for them or the specific recommendations that you're doing here, but more at the sort of high level principles way of approaching this problem, what should most businesses be doing differently?
Those are the last 4 slides of the presentation. So maybe we should come back to that and dig in. Yeah. So I meant, yeah, yes, I will answer that. And then we can talk more about each of those ones. So let's talk about Hillary for America. So as I said, they got in touch with me and said they wanted to build a talent team. They said we need to hire almost 4,000 people, 4,500 people in a year and a half. And they said we can give you 3 staff to do it, plus doing an intern program, which is not even on here, which is 800 interns as well. And I was like, okay. So what we did, so how many people are familiar, how many of you were following along with the U.S. election in 2016? Okay. So a couple of things, let's just like lay out that even many people in the States don't even know. So first of all, presidential campaigns are enormous. Like most people didn't know that we were going to hire almost 5,000 paid, like full-time, more than full-time people in order to try to deliver Hillary to the White House. Trump, interestingly, did not have that many people, but in the past campaigns, both sides had roughly this many. Republicans usually have fewer than Democrats because they don't do as much ground game. But Trump had about 10% of this. He had about 350 people, which we can talk about. This is interesting. So we had Brooklyn HQ. We had 800 people there. And that was like kind of like a full stack company. We had like everything from lawyers, accountants, budget people, to a digital team, which had social media, content, videography, design shop, like Facebook, and like a digital ads team, a whole shop there. Analytics, which was a different team, all the data scientists, analysts, tech, which was engineers and product people. Those was a different team. Policy, communications. So all these different departments that were operating much like a full company. One of those departments was the organizing team, states and organizing. So that team, more or less, oversaw everybody in the states who was all these organizers, folks who were out talking to voters, knocking on doors, this kind of thing. So the way it worked is that we staffed up 800 at HQ over the first 9 months, so in 2015. Also, most people in the states, like they knew that Hillary was running, but they didn't know that there was people working together in an office, let alone that many people. So we hired those 800. When I joined, there were probably about 50 people who had been like pre-tapped because you can't hire people before you announce, basically. So they'd been pre-tapped as volunteers, including myself. So that was 2015. And then the voting started in the primaries in January or February of 2016. Long primary season, as you guys know, against Bernie. We were moving. So in addition to those 800, we had another about 400 people in the states who had been in the first 4 early states, and then we started to move them around, like because the primary was lasting longer than we had thought it would. So we would like shift them to new states and have them show up a week in advance and like talk to voters for that week, and then that primary would happen. So by the time we could start, by the time we got the nomination, I think it was like June or something. It was pretty late, and I don't mean officially nominated. I just mean when it was clear that it was going to be Hillary. That's when we were able to start ramping the real hiring wave, which was these like 3,500 people in 3 months. So my team had to deliver about 15,000 resumes like 4 weeks or 5 or 6 weeks in advance of the first hiring waves out in the States. And these are across 12 states. So like we needed people. It was a weird crosscut. For these were like highly specialized. This was like a startup hiring level, like super specialist talent who was the best at what they did and also willing to move to Brooklyn and also willing to take pay cuts. The campaign pays like something like 2/3, like 1/2 to 2/3 of like market rate. So it's like not terrible, but it's definitely like nobody would come there for the money kind of thing. And then these other folks were a whole mix. I mean, we had consultants, like super premium top consultants who were like taking a leave to go knock doors and be an organizer. We had folks who worked at Starbucks, like baristas. We had folks who were coming out of college, folks who never went to college, a whole range and mix of people. And were kind of allocated based on where they had relationships, where they knew, and also just where they were willing to go if they had a car. I mean, just tons of stuff of us, okay, you're going to Iowa, like, we'll see you later. That was kind of the way it went. So that was the overall setup. This is the work that my team and I did, and I think this is just some commentary about at a bigger organization, or especially a big, fast-moving organization with where the executives, many of the people who were executives had worked on past campaigns and not worked with the talent team because it was the first time there was one. So I was kind of working very entrepreneurially. So just to give some high-level commentary here, in the beginning, it was very much like pairing with the department heads and their deputies and the team leads to talk about what their plans were, like coach, be available for questions, be a sounding board for their plans for who they were kind of trying to bring on, designing hiring processes. So going from scratch on like, okay, this is the best way, the most efficient way to like ask these questions and then do this kind of interview, do this trial project, like designing trial projects for each team. 1 or 2 teams had them, but most didn't. So we installed in the beginning, like as much efficiency as we could, knowing the volume of work that was going to have to be done. Installing an applicant tracking system, ATS, and configuring it and like doing the trainings internally was hugely important. We actually used 3 different ones. I don't know how pertinent these are here, but Greenhouse, Lever, and Jazz. I don't know if they're in the European market or not. But Lever, I think Lever works internationally, and they're a great ATS. I would really recommend them. They see talent very fluidly and very organically, very humanly, which I think is important. A lot of the other ones, it's like, yeah, they just feel like you're dealing with like robots or something in the ATS, which is not fun. Hiring trainings, coaching. A lot of people in politics have never had formal hiring training. They're trained to hire people they know, which is this like not great proxy for being good at hiring. You know, if you hire someone you know that they're not terrible, but you don't know if someone was better. Probably somebody was. And you also hire people you know, so your network's like it's like the same people. In politics, that's especially dangerous because if you're using the same playbooks and the same thinking, and the world has moved on, which sort of happened to us, in my opinion, like you're working against, you're fighting the last war. And I think there's a lot to be said about that happening for us. Although, I don't know, it was close, so you can't blame any one thing. But giving people rigorous hiring training so they knew what to look for, they knew how to think about it, they knew where to prioritize, and trying to actively resist the like just hiring people we know. So I would be constantly, my team and I'd be constantly like hand delivering candidates who were from the wild, like specifically to try to get in front of just other people who like knew people on the campaign. We wound up at the end, I was proud of this, 25% of the HQ teams, 25% of people didn't know anybody in the campaign, were like totally at wild applicants, or we recruited them, which was actually a lot relative to how politics usually works. Usually that would be like 2% or 5% or something. In the States, partly because of the volume, almost everybody hadn't worked in a campaign before, maybe like 60% or 70%, because there was just a lot of people who were new to it, which is common, I think, in the States. Recruiting support. So if teams like needed extra work on LinkedIn, or like they just needed extra kind of pipelines for their candidates, we would dive in and do that. Everything was case by case. The teams were all different in how they used us and what they needed from us. In terms of development, so my work was 80% talent acquisition, 20% talent development. Partially because it makes sense for a campaign not to care too much about developing people. Like, we go away at the end, win or lose. So that made sense. But that said, like, there's a couple of things that really mattered while we were there. Because one of these key things about development is that when you're helping a human grow, they do better where they are even then, even before they're like doing the next thing. So this is kind of going back to the career pathing thing. Like, when you're helping somebody, even if it's just thinking about, believing that they can do something more in the future, starting to think about it, let alone actually encouraging, like actually developing them, they just show up more to work, which is this like 2-for-1. You get like both things, which is great. So one of the things we did was that. I'll start with talent advocacy though. This is an environment where, like I said, the political culture is totally like work 1,000 hours a week, don't sleep, eat junk food, drink, I don't know how many Red Bulls a day. Like, it's like really sort of not healthful environment. And in our case, for example, we were working in this office in Brooklyn. Like, I was in meetings with leadership trying to represent the view of like, we need to give people some time, even if we just let them work from home on the weekend instead of in the office. We worked 7 days a week for basically a year and a half straight. We had a few days off, like maybe 4 or 5 or something. So just like being a talent advocate to try to like understand and explain. And in that case, I wasn't successful, but I tried, right? I was in the room being like, I'm showing you the research that shows, like I said before, that people are less productive. Are you sure you still want to do this? And them saying yes. I'm like, okay, I tried. Like, you saw the research, whatever. That's just a cultural thing. But being that talent advocate is very important. Management trainings. So again, in many cases, most people have never been like formally trained in how to manage another human being. They may have managed another human being, but never been trained and really walked through like, what does it mean to support somebody both in terms of their work and all, like what are the right ways to support somebody in terms of their work and also them as a human. So we did trainings around that, which I can talk about. We also did manager coaching. So we set up like a pro bono coaching network where we had 50 of our team leads get actual coaches, which was great. Obama's campaign did that, but it was like 12. So we leveled that program up. The team pulse check. So this is actually the thing. So when I first got this job, I called Laszlo Bock from Google, who, if you guys don't know him, he was their SVP of people who grew Google from like 2,000 employees to like 60,000. He did all their people work. He sees a lot of my thinking has come from his world. And I called him and I said, if you're me, like, you just got this job, this is happening, this whole organization's running at the speed it's running at, like, what's the one thing, what do you do to try to like shift the thing in the right direction? And this is the thing he told me, and I just did exactly what he said, which is have your teams score their managers and have the managers see those scores repeatedly as often as you can, but like at least, you know, Google did a thing, they did it every 6 months. We did it every month because we just like didn't have that much time. And so you can look, there's a website called ReWork, which we can send a link out, but there's basically a set of questions that Google like honed in on as being the relevant ones. And they're not, when you see the questions, they're not like crazy questions, but they're just basic stuff like, does your manager make you feel inspired to show up to work every day? Does your manager care about you as a person? Does your manager give you clear goals? Like, it's stuff like that, but there's 12 of them, and we had people score, it's a Likert scale, so you score like 1 to 7, and we made these heat maps that we showed managers and also the team, like the department heads, and it was incredible. Like, it was like sending sonar into the teams, right, to see like who's actually good, because a lot of people, and I don't think this is just politics, but maybe especially there, a lot of people like act like they're really good and like kind of put on these like, oh yeah, and like then you learn from their team that they're like terrible manager and like they don't treat them well at all and they're like miserable on their team. So this tool totally flipped the like visibility and actually put the employee like ethos first, and there were literally people who had to like shape up as managers because that was being shown to their boss every month that they were getting these bad scores. And, you know, you can see which questions. So it's like, okay, this person clearly across the whole board is like, their team doesn't believe they care about them. So like, what, that's a conversation. Like, what's the deal? So we saw market improvement. We saw like a 30% improvement in scores over the course of the campaign, which is, I mean, that's a huge number. So that was, and we attributed a lot of that from different conversations and data looking at to like this tool and also a combination of the other programs. So this stuff does work. I mean, it totally works. The last thing on there is, and actually just to say that, so the way that, to close the loop on that, so you have the teams score their managers. anonymously, like you can't see whose name scores which scores, but the managers see the aggregate scores, and then the managers in their next one-on-ones with their teams, like refer to the scores in some way. They don't have to, it's not even specific of like, what are you going to do about it? It's just literally like, communicate that it was seen, what is your takeaway? And so sometimes it would be like, let's talk about this because I don't agree with this. Or sometimes it would be like, okay, how can I do this better? But those conversations are exactly the conversations that need to happen for the teams to evolve and grow. Like you want your whole teams and your managers to be evolving, to be work better together. So it's not just developing people, it's developing teams. And this is a great tool to do that. Last one, employee support. When people, and this was a huge issue, were just burned out or stressed or feeling, oh yeah. Well, we know we had many teams that were 3. I mean, the minimum is 1, and then it's just not anonymous. But we had teams where we would be like, you should still do it, even though it's not anonymous. And like, you both know it's not anonymous. But even those scores, maybe they go up a little bit because it's like the person doesn't want to like knowingly hit them, but it's still useful. Because even if you have like 5, 5.5, 6, 7s, I mean, there's still a variation. Like it's still clear where the person needs to put their focus to be a better manager, which is the part that matters.
Was there resistance to this?
Yes. Well, it's one of those, yes, there was resistance, and it's one of those things where we just had to sell the higher ups, and then that was it. Like people, and to be honest, were probably actively not pleased, I mean, the managers, because you can see why, right? Like it's this side pressure coming from like a new angle they have to like manage, but that's the point. And yeah, it's like nobody can really, what are you going to say? Like, I don't want to be examined. It's like, well, why? Nobody can really have a good articulation. We had a couple people kind of say like the anonymous, and they're like, we can figure out who it is. Or like we had people saying like, I only have 2 people below me. They're going to be able to, I'll be able to figure out who it is. So therefore we shouldn't do this. And we'd just be like, if they're willing to still do it, then we should still do it. And so in almost every case, like it wasn't mandatory, but we had 95% of the organization doing it, including all the states. So yeah, in the states, it's like in the past cycles, they would have no idea. Like the HQ had no concept in the states of like which team leads were, maybe the state level directors would know, but even them, they're busy as hell. Like, so this really let us zoom in and say, hey, what's going on with this person? Like, and there were changes made based on the stuff, which I'm proud of. So I think it was good. Employee support is just, it's really the other side of the talent advocacy coin. It's like, I think a key role of the people team is to like be there for people. And I mean that like primarily again as humans, but also, so it's different than HR. Like I wasn't HR. If someone had like a literal sexual harassment claim, goes to HR, but anything short of like those kind of level of like legal matters, I would get a lot of and be able to help, right? Because it's like, I can broker conversations between managers and people. I can give people commentary, like you're not crazy. Like everybody's experiencing this, or saying that nobody's, that is unique. Like that is not a thing that should be happening here, so you should have a conversation about that. So just being known for being on their side, I think sets a people team up well to like make, I say demands, to advocate for those people, right? Because it's like you're representing employees, and actually for management, that's a valuable position to be able to speak to. It's like, I'll give you another example. It's kind of a funny example. One of the things that we did was we moved people around. We call them deployments. We would move people during the primaries and then again at the end, like out into the states from HQ. And because it's a campaign, for example, they didn't tell anybody when they were getting hired that this was going to happen. No one told me. Apparently it's a thing. And it's like, okay, campaigns do this. Great. No, they didn't say that though to all these new people who didn't do campaigns before. So you had all these people who were like super excited to be at HQ where they got hired to be, who were then told, you're going out to Iowa for the last 8 weeks or something, or 6 weeks. And it's like, they just are doing a totally different job in a totally different place. And the first round of these conversations, like, didn't go very well, right? They had the managers kind of say it as like, you're going out, whatever, like a very like transactional tell. And the effect was, as you can imagine, people just being like, feeling very, like mistreated, like not handled with care. So me out there being like, this is, like I got like super up in arms and like went to chief of staff and went to this conversation like we can't treat people like this. Why are we doing this? And so as you might guess, they're like, okay, you're in charge of deployments now. So for all the next 4 rounds, it was like me and this team that they gave me to like communicate that in a way that like didn't make people feel. So it's little stuff like that, but I mean that's not little stuff, because imagine these people are showing up in these states, supposedly infusing all this energy from HQ to try to help win. Imagine having to show up but like feeling subtly resentful at your employer for doing it. It's like, this stuff matters. So that's another example of how those things go together. They're really important. So yeah, we actually got really good at that, and like people had a good experience. We gave them like deeper trainings, so on and so forth. So it didn't turn out well at the end for Hillary, for us. But yeah, this work I was very happy with, especially given that it was kind of build the playbook in real time. I was really happy with it, with our outcomes. Now we're gonna get to the like advice. What I advise people to do. So the first thing is really whether you agree or not that people are the most important thing. Even if you don't agree, out of your own best interest, make time for this stuff. So especially when you're extra busy and extra stressed. So hiring the right people will make you less stressed. So at the times when you're heading into the most stressful periods is when you should be thinking through, like, can I solve this, or can I pre-solve that stress with a good hire? Now, to be clear, you should only hire when you really need to, is my view. And in a certain way, hiring represents a form of failure. Like, you failed to create systems to accommodate this need without a new person. But so it's like, don't like the more headcount you have, it does not make you more successful. So don't think that way, because that will lead to you spending way more money than you need to spend. But if you're going to hire somebody, know that like hiring them sooner and the better person you get. So the more you measure twice and cut once kind of thing, like the better. If you sidetrack it and like do your hiring work, after hours or at night or after doing all your other stuff, it's going to delay it and make it worse and like not solve your problem. So literally my view is like, do your hiring interviews, your role drafting first, like do that in the morning, and then like put the other stuff off that you're having to do until later to force yourself to see the importance of how to get this right, and it'll go faster. So that's one. Second, as you're designing your organization, and designing organizations typically actually doesn't happen like all at once, like this is going to be our organization. That's rare. Usually you're designing it in real time incrementally by adding to a team or by like, canceling a team or something. So as you're doing that, design from first principles. Like just look literally at the data and actual flow of activities that are happening in your company and decide based on your company, like where do you actually need a new human and what are they actually doing? It's dangerous to look to other companies and say the playbook here is to like hire 25 salespeople in the next 2 years because we just got this Series B and that's what we do. Like that's very dangerous because it is so like details matter. So it's like everything is so context specific. Even if your investor's telling you do this, it's probably because they've just seen that playbook work before, but it's very hard to tell why that playbook worked before. Also, they've probably seen it not work a bunch of times and they're just not saying that, right? Like companies fail with these template playbooks all the time. So given all that information, it's like you can know the analogs, like be aware of like what the general wisdom would be, but then set that aside and like try to design from scratch and see if they match. And if they don't match, like I would go with your custom design because 99% of the time, your business model in your market with your team is going to be a unique org design, and it should be, right? Because it's like its own creature, right? Yeah. So it also is fun. It's also like helps you have more sort of agency and identity with your company, which is also a net benefit that everybody will be able to feel. So that's what I think about that. Okay. So this one it's very easy, especially when founders get really type A about this, to like create a bunch of structure and a bunch of process and a bunch of weight to your systems, to your operating systems, to your people work. You want to have the minimum viable, like just enough there that people know what's going on and feel comfortable and supported, and not a bunch more. This is also a little bit about the humans thing. I think one of my views is a hugely defining feature of humans is they really appreciate safety, but also like freedom. So like they need to feel like they understand what's going on, but you don't want to overly constrict or constrain people. Creativity wise, energy wise, even if they don't recognize it and they can't name it, in many cases they can, but if they can't name it, it's still going to drag on their overall contribution. Like what you really want to be doing, every different role possible, what you really want to be doing is like giving somebody the baseline level of information and constraint and then turning them loose to like figure out as much as they can about how to do it the best way. One way that I do that is for roles that I'm scoping, I will basically say, okay, here's the deal. we got the basics, the bonus, and the moonshot. So like the basics is like, I just need you to do this. Like no matter what, these are things you have to do as key part of your role. The bonus is like, okay, if you're doing the basics, not if, when in addition to doing the basics, if you have extra energy, here's where you could really move the needle. Like it would be extra beneficial to the team. We could pay you a bonus if you do this kind of thing, like the extra upside, and then say, okay, if you really knocked out of the park, like we don't expect this at all, but if you completely knocked out of the park, this is what that would look like. So for people who are, say, entrepreneurial, people who are driven and excited about their roles, they will immediately, it's kind of like the thing of like, you want to hire lazy people because they'll figure out the fastest way to do something. I actually kind of agree with that. Like they will immediately figure out how to like do the basics well and just systematize that so they can get to the bonus because they really want it. And I don't mean bonus in like a pay sense. I meant it as like, this is just the extra stuff that would be great. If you set the bars right, they'll immediately figure out the fastest, therefore cheapest way to do the basics. They'll then focus on the bonus, and they may even hit the moonshot of like, I don't know, finding a new mentor for the company or like doing something that's totally catalytic. But having everybody tuned to like which thing theirs might be in that branch is actually a really good way of keeping them like looking to the stars kind of thing, which is good. Anytime you can, there's the Netflix deck, which you guys may be familiar with, which is kind of famous. Like one of the things in there was like, they don't have everyone has to wear pants rule. There's something around that, but like everybody still wears pants. Or like clothes. There's something around that I think is instructive, and it's a little bit like the vacation thing. Like, I think in most cases, it's actually better to just like not have a policy one way or the other, but to be clear that the reason is because people are allowed to do what they need to do. And if you start having abuses of the system, like then put guidelines. That's just the thinking around that. And this also goes to like meetings. Like you should only have meetings that you actually need. And when you are having them, you should be really clear. Like, what are we doing in this meeting? Is this a discussion? Is this a debate? Are we making a decision here? Are we like sharing information so that somebody can make a decision after? This is related to the decision-making thing. Like, be really clear about what the point is, and then make sure that you actually need a meeting, because meetings are like a huge draw of attention and time and focus. Okay. So I think this is a comment to train your creature early. If you buy into everything I've said, but your mentality is, well, we might not even exist. We might not even make it to being like 50 people. So if we're only going to be 10 people, we can kind of like make the thing work. We don't need to be this intentional. Not entirely false. You can get by with just figuring it out with 10 people. The issue is if you start to succeed, or if you work at a company that's getting bigger, it is really hard, like really difficult to go back and rewire all this stuff to be the right way from the beginning. Like you almost can't do it, right? Like you're going to be caught in a certain culture and certain norms. In order to do culture change, you have to basically fire a high percentage of people. I think there's some statistic, I don't know it. I think there's a statistic that's like effective culture change, like empirically effective culture change at corporates always involve firing at least 30% of people or something. There's some key thing around you have to literally swap out humans who have different value sets, which makes sense, right? Because that's like kind of what this is. So to that point, if you really believe that your company is going to be around and be larger down the road, like you should invest in this stuff soon, because it's going to set you up to have fewer and fewer and fewer headaches. So the way that I see talent and the talent engine is, if you're focused on how do we recruit the best person, you need to zoom out, because what you can do when you go back to the talent brand and all these systems, they all work together. So you could play your cards right in the beginning. It becomes easier and easier and easier to recruit people. Eventually, you don't have to be recruiting people because they're showing up because they know that your company is a great place to work, and you're doing good content marketing that has to do with branding, your talent brand. Like you can gear the system so it's like inbound workflow, which is obviously much better than having to outbound recruit everybody. But if you get too hyper focused on just the recruiting track, you will build like a sales style recruiting team, which in my opinion is like not, if you're doing that, you may have to do that in the beginning for some, maybe you get funding, you have to hire a bunch of engineers, you have to do that. But like, you can kind of see what I mean. Like you want to design a system that does not make you have to go sales recruit a bunch of people, because that's just a lousy experience for everybody. So this is a comment about focusing on stuff early. Okay, I think this is the last one. So it's in line with all the other ones, but it's like this sort of organic, fluid nature. Like, in my opinion, the default expectation from everybody on the team is that every 6 months, if not fast in that, if you're really growing fast, you should be redesigning like entire pieces of your operating system and all the people systems, because you have different needs. Like a company just shouldn't, it's actually a sign of progress to be doing this. It's not chaos, it's the opposite. In fact, if anything, if you're not having to design your systems every 6 months, that's evidence that you're not growing, whatever, relative to the potential for a company to grow. Like if you're really succeeding, you need to be leveling up all the systems at a pretty fast clip relative to what you might think. So it doesn't mean you have to do everything on a 6-month basis, but like a rolling iterative kind of systems tweak to like all the pieces of the people system, everything on that other slide before, is like highly advised before things become a headache. This is another thing. Get ahead of stuff before it's a headache. So just look a little around the corners and see like, okay, if this meeting structure or this performance review structure is like already arduous and there's only 10 of us, this is not going to work for 30 people. So like, let's like really think about that right now, because when the 30 people show up, we don't have to spend a month and a half dragging our feet and looking behind the ball with them, which is like not a good look when you have 30, this kind of thing. And I think it's just actually kind of liberating to think of things as never being set, because then it's like you just flow and grow. So I think this one sort of just speaks for itself. It all comes back to this. So if you're ever like trying to figure out, if you're ever in a hard position with people and trying to figure out what to do here, like just ask yourself, like, what do humans need and want in the situation? I have yet to find a situation where that answer doesn't, this includes like the backdrop to like legal situations. It's like, okay, great. We have the legal process we need to enact. Also, what would a human want to experience in this situation? And like approaching it from that, like always helps. It's never going to not help. So that's kind of the end thesis of all this. Yeah, I think to put that at a macro level too, like one of the amazing things about the startup space and about entrepreneurship and about invention is we get to make, our whole society is just stuff that people made, including organizations and how they work. Like we can make whatever we want. It has to work, but we can make whatever we want. So if you're in the seat getting to craft a company, like it's a major it's a real contribution to society at large of like being a better place for everyone to live, to like do things in a different way, in a better way, in a more human way. So I would invite everybody to do that. Also, it works better. There you go.
So if you could do one thing differently of what you did on the Hillary campaign, what would it be?
Probably argue for even more staff. Like, I mean, it's a serious answer, because I like waited. My approach was basically to try to like earn respect and value in the beginning, in the first couple months, and then cash it in for staff, which is kind of what I did. Because they told me in the beginning, they're like, you're going to have to like make the case for these people. And I kind of did that, but I also like that was valuable time. So I wish I had just said I need one person right away, like to just start, because the other staff didn't come until like the later fall, and I think I would have gotten even further. Like resources just really matter, So I should have like been more risk tolerant and been like put myself on the line even more.
How much did social networks actually come into play when gathering and collecting either volunteers or staff? Because I know really it was like Obama's campaign that really kind of launched all of that. And then what was the staff percentage to pay to volunteer? And how was that handled?
So the volunteers, I mean, there were tens of thousands of volunteers, many. The organizing team, their job was to essentially manage the volunteers. So I don't even know. I mean, it was literally probably like 80,000 or something, or 100,000. It also gets tough because some people like volunteered for one weekend, and it's like other people volunteered for like almost full time. So it gets dicey. So we basically ran a third Obama campaign. So all the stuff that they did around gaining volunteers, including like the stuff you're talking about, the digital stuff, we did all that, and also the like new versions of those things basically. So we were more rigorous. We had, I don't know the exact figure, but for the amount of money that we spent, we got, I think, 30% more results in terms of like doors knocked and all these things. Again, obviously it didn't amount to a win in this case, but from that standpoint, we ran a really tight third version of what his campaign set up. To answer the question about social networks, I mean, I know that we hired people from like who interact with us on Twitter. We found a bunch of people on LinkedIn. My team was like recruiting people on LinkedIn. I just see everything as so swimming together, right? Like my work was basically to harness and channel the incoming interest and attention and put that into usable traffic flow that we could break into these roles and like be really fast at processing. So it was more about filtering. For those 3,500 people, like we weren't recruiting organizers. We were like making sure that we had enough attention. So for example, when Hillary would go, most of the time, everyone we talked to couldn't think of another time that a candidate would say on stage, like, we're hiring. Like we got her team to like get her to say that. And it started to work really well. Like she'd be in Nevada saying that, and like suddenly we'd see this huge spike because she was like on TV in Nevada, right? And so we were just trying to like tilt the spotlight towards the fact that we were hiring and then channel everything that was coming through it.
Hi, I was interested at the point you made near the beginning about the salary ranges being around 2/3 or lower. I wonder, because this is quite a specific recruiting, people know it's a short term. Did you have a lot of difficulty with negotiations of salary to get people to take these pay cuts? Or do you attract the people that would just do anything to be part of it?
Well, both and not. Well, so here's what that did. Certain people were just out, which was good, which is helpful from a recruiting standpoint. They're just not going to do it. Other people, they were on the line, and it was kind of weird. We'd be like, okay, so you're like, you want to do this job, which is this really intense specific thing, but you want to do it for $20K more than we're offering. It's like, does that really, like, you either like are down for this adventure and it's not about the money, or you're kind of not. So when we presented it that way, people would just sort themselves. They're like, no, I'm down for this. Like, I'll do it. Or they're like, no, I'm going to do something else. So that was actually easy on us. What was hard was in some industries, the number of people who are down for that is just lower, right? Like tech and analytics, it's like they made a choice. I use engineering as an example. They made a choice to pay people like at the same discount rate as all the other teams. You have to keep in mind, the market rates, this is another comment on compensation. I subscribe to it's like similar to the Netflix view that market rate is how you should comp. So I think you should pay people the most you can pay them such that they wouldn't leave to go to a good competitor for that amount of money. So you shouldn't leave money on the table with people. If they come to you with like $50K more offer, you should be like, we already paid you as much as we want to pay you, so you should take that offer. And it's different across the organization. Like that means that you wind up with like not everybody making the same amount of money. So with the campaign, it was the opposite. Like they pegged like more at the like titling level. So you had these engineers who were making like, I don't know, 60 or 70, like a lot less money than they can make even down the road at another startup, even at their same, rank. And that was just difficult, especially in engineering. You have some, I was in the room, a couple of our advisors would be like, you should cut the engineering team in half and pay everybody double and get better engineers. And I think from a private sector standpoint, that made sense. But from a comp standpoint in the campaign, they just made the call that like it was not fair. So we had to deal with some of those realities. Yeah, so good engineers saying, I just can't take a 50% pay cut. And we're like, we get it. Yeah.
I just wanted to, you touched a little bit on that, but I was wondering if you can expand. I work in recruitment, so this is where my question stems from. But in terms of your experience on the campaign and previously, kind of what do you think is best practice in terms of screening and selection of candidates?
Yes, sure. So what I think is that you want to make sure that your scope is right and then lock it and not let anybody, the stakeholders, change the scope once you're in the market with a role. 2, you want to like specifically source all at once with the channels you're going to go on and have reason to believe you're going to need. So don't do the thing of like, well, we're going to try this one and then we'll do this one. It's like you want like a sonic boom going out for that role all at once. The screening input is, so my favorite is to ask 2 or 3 like mini essay questions on the application. So like, what evidence do you have that you can do X, Y, or Z? And they're not meant to be aggressive. They're just meant to be like, literally, what evidence do you have? And there's no wrong answer, but there's worse answers, right? So like, if you say, what evidence do you have that you can close $1 million in sales for a product that's a $20K price point? Like someone can say, well, I've done that before, which is like, okay, that's good evidence. Or they can say, well, I've sold deal sizes to buyers that, relatively speaking, is the same purchase decision, which is actually pretty good evidence. You're like, that's pretty good, even if the overall amount of deal sizes was lower. Or they can say, I wrote grants for nonprofits, and you're like, okay, that's like not the same thing, but it's better than nothing. Or they could say, I'm a people person. You're like, that is just not an answer to that question. It's like, no good. So like they're out. So you get these answers. Typically then I would say you do like a short and like heartfelt screening call. Like you're not trying to determine if they're the person. You're just trying to say, do we like this person? Do they like us? Are they really into this? How they hear about, just kind of like getting to know you. That's also for them, not just for you. Make sure they're not a crazy person. Well, make sure that they see if they come across as being a crazy person at that point. You can't be sure they're not until later. Then have them do a trial project. So you're doing like representative work. Part of why you talk to them is so they'll do the work. Couple hours, nothing intense. Don't ask them to do like 20 hours of work. Don't ask them to do it like on a 24-hour turnaround. Like give them a few days. But then C, like you're looking at actual representative work. So now you should have a sense of who the finalists should be going into what should be longer interviews, like 90-minute, walk me through like your last 2 jobs, what were you hired to do, what challenges did you face, what actually happened, how would your supervisor rate you? Like direct, put them, ask these hard, they're kind of boring questions, but they need to, you got to know from people like what they've been through. You can't BS a slow, boring interview, right? Because there's just no way to do it, or it's obvious if you can. So it's like you want to get through those things, and then there's no way that you don't have a stacked ordered list of who you like the most. There's just no way you can do a 90-minute interview with 6 people and not have like a top 3. And so then you're just trying to like, have them meet the team or whatever the final stuff is. They're spending time and being clear with your team from like the scorecard standpoint. We're like, these are the things that we're still trying to figure out. These are things we've already figured out. We don't have to ask them for a third time like this other thing. Like we already asked them that. We know that they can do that. Now we're pushing on this or something, right? And so then, you spend your time with the finalists. But what you don't have to do is first phone screen 4 dozen people because you have those answers, right? You know what I mean? Yeah.
One thing for myself, because I work with high growth companies, is I find, and maybe you can speak to this, is hiring ahead of your growth. And I find that this is so important in your like A/B round, that you're not hiring at that 50 people, that you actually should be hiring kind of ahead of that growth. So you have those people basically pulling up the organization and mentoring them. So I think kind of organizational growth is something in kind of your view on that and how you've done it.
As long as I agree with it. I mean, as long as I think, as long as you're confident, as long as you have the resources and or momentum where you're sure you're going to hit that phase. I've seen a couple companies hire like executives who are built for 100-person companies or or 200 or 300-person companies. Those people don't always do well in the like 10 to 20 to 30 company range for different reasons. So I've seen several instances of that, but I mean, on basis, no, I think people should be leading their shot because it's kind of like the 6 to 6 month thing, right? If you hire for your current size and then, you're just bigger and don't have the right team, you need to do that.
Yeah, that's actually a problem that I think a lot of growing startups face. At first you hire, first of all, you need to get the talent, so you're kind of taking whatever you can, and sometimes it's more about skills, but more about the mindset and the motivation and the learning curve you're going to have in the first months or years. And then after that, you see a lot of startups hiring senior executives with a lot of experience because they need to level up. But then how do you actually make sure that they fit in the organization that you built and stay, at the top level? So it can totally kill a startup for us.
Well, I believe in the hire slow for executives, actually, because of that issue. I also think it's okay to hire people, especially those who are those like versatilist people. It's okay to hire them as a little bit of stem cells as long as you're clear with them. Like, we are hiring you without knowing where you're going to be a year from now. We're going to figure it out together. That actually can go really well because they tend to like, if they're at that point in their career, they tend to like that. But what's not good is like internally saying, well, we're going to bring in Jane like here, but like we're thinking she might be over here, and then Jane's like has no idea, and then she's like being moved around. Like that's not as good.
And can a good alternative can be to actually prepare the people who are there from the start. Some of them, and go through enough training or whatever to take on those responsibilities at later times. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Hi. So I work in UX design, and there's kind of 2 models that I've seen to staff up a design department. One is you start up hiring a bunch of junior people just to do work, right? Especially if you don't have a particular department, or if you have really fast growth, you just need to get something out. And then you hire senior leadership later. And so that's challenging. The other way is you hire senior leadership, and then the idea being that they then staff up the department as they see fit. So you're nodding, so you've seen these models. Can you just...
Yeah. So one annoying thing is like context always, it's like it always depends. Okay, it always depends. Here's what I think. I think that I'll use my current situation. So my organization has a lot of money and no team. Like I'm the fourth person and my job is to build the team. So I'm in this exact position across a whole range of functions. And I'll tell you what my plan is to do. My plan is to not start by hiring junior people and then adding seniors or executives. My plan is to hire mostly executives who we specifically are screening for the ability to build teams. Like they have literally constructed teams. They understand recruiting. They understand that stuff. And a little bit also who are down to like roll up their sleeves, which is a thing. Like this is kind of what I was saying. Like some executives just don't know how, or they don't want to, or both. So I plan to hire executives who can do those things and hire a vertical stack beneath them, like in real time, so that you have like executive, deputy, leverager, and like a junior or one or two junior people like immediately, so that there's somebody there to like do that work in the beginning. And I think TBD on whether probably what like a best case scenario is you get an executive who either brings their own deputy they know they work well with, or you can deliver them like, here's 3 candidates that we want you to meet that we think are going to be great, and then definitely to say, here's 6 candidates for the junior role, like y'all get to pick, or we can go back to the market or whatever. But like we should have done our scoping well enough that we're pretty right that like this executive and this deputy can make use of these 3 people, like role wise, and then just like hand them slates. Like that's my plan. And it's kind of like, it's rare though that we have enough runway and foresight to know how to do that. So I'd say in the absence of that, I don't know, it's like a funding round, I guess. So maybe it's not that rare, but does that answer your question? Yeah. 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 So in that case, what I would do is try to, and this is what I would do. I would try to strike the middle ground. I would try to, if I only can hire one role, I would hire like essentially like the deputy person first, who like is not that far away from the work. Like they know how to do the work. They've done it in their last job. They're ready for management. They're ready for more team lead, but they're also definitely not the executive, and that's okay because they're going to like run that ship for a while. They can hustle and like get that department up. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Nathaniel.
Yes.
It was really, really interesting. Guys, stick around for a bit, and round of applause for the wonderful speaker.
Que la famille.